What's up gang, Voltie here with another deck tech. Today is going to be 8.0, this one is for Vance in particular, and I wanted to make an aggro deck that was more traditional in nature, and I think I've come up with something that's quite playable here, so let's get right into it. First off, we've got Midrange as the only Planeswalker. Realistically, all of the other Planeswalkers are either pointed, like Renin 6 and Comet, or are just kind of bad. Midrange gives us a way to close out the game, as well as an individual threat that's pretty difficult to stop. We have a couple of mana dorks in the 1-drop slot, as well as some 1-mana creatures. We've got Hexdrinker, Paw-Patch Recruit, Mother of Runes, Ragavan, and Wildner Cattle as our real creatures, and the rest are mana dorks or mana dorks adjacent. Going up the curve, we've got a bunch of 2-drops that all have some utility. Stoneforge to get our equipment, Morlock to kill creatures, Voice to help against blue decks, etc. Broadside, we're paying a point for it just because it has a unique ability to close out games, alongside the Pitch Elementals, which we have all 3 of in the main deck. This is supported by Ephemerate. But otherwise, I think having 0 mana interaction for each of these different parts of the game and each of these different zones is really important when you're playing such a fair deck. And Flage is realistically the closer of the deck. You have lots of different ways you can end the game, but I would expect a decent chunk of them to be closed out by Flage, especially if you give it haste. Moving down to sorceries, we've got our Chain Lightning and our 4th Eolingus. 4th Eolingus is the only card in the deck that introduces either the Monarchy or the Initiative, and I'll go into why I've foregone the Initiative in a moment, once we finish the deck list. For our instance, we've got Ephemerate as previously mentioned, a Bolt, a Helix, a Plow, and a Misstep for interaction, and a Once Upon a Time just because it's almost free. We've got 3 different equipment that Stoneforge can get. So we've got a Clamp for a bit of endgame, a Jet for the creature matchups, and pre-war formal wear because it's completely bonkers. And I've managed to squeeze in a pod. I'm not 100% certain the pod should stay in, but the general philosophy of the deck is that it's a much bigger version of Zoo that can go for much longer in terms of how many turns the game can go, while still being able to maintain pressure. Last non-land is Fable. Fable's broken, no surprises there. The mana base is all lands that make mana except for Arena of Glory and Caracas, and Viseiju, which all have upsides. And then the sideboard is pretty simple. We've got some removal, we've got some blue hate, we've got some spell hate, we've got some land hate, we've got artifact hate, reanimator hate, that sort of thing. Okay, so in terms of why this deck looks like this, as opposed to something that has, say, 12 1-drops, including Curdape and Loam Lion, as well as, a bunch of 2-mana creatures that don't have as much text, but are just generally larger. For example, Bone Crusher Giant or Watchful Variants, Fleeceman Lion. There's plenty of different things you could do in a Naya deck. And obviously the elephant in the room, or what's missing from this deck, White Plume Adventurer, Seasoned Dungeoneer, Caves of Chaos Adventurer. So why are we not playing the Initiative in this particular deck? The main reason is that when you introduce the Initiative into either your deck building or into the game state, you are actively encouraged to support that mechanic. So if you introduce the Initiative, you have to make sure that your opponent can't attack you, and you have to make sure that you kill as many of the creatures as possible, and ideally you have a suite of Initiative creatures to back it up, so that if you lose the Initiative, you can get it back, or if you have the Initiative, you can play another one and keep going down the chain. Get to Forge faster, get to the 5 damage mode faster. If you have all of that, your deck construction then gets much more limited. All of the Initiative creatures, barring White Plume, cost 4. Suddenly you have to play too many mana dorks. You don't really have a reason to be playing 2-drop creatures, and you should be playing, a Chrome Mox and a Lotus Petal and an Elvish Spirit Guide to get to that 4 mana bump. With this deck, I really wanted to strive to make every card individually playable, so that no matter what you drew over the course of the game, you'd be alive to keep putting pressure onto your opponent. So, if they've introduced the initiative, you would have enough creatures and removal to try to steal it. But if you're playing the initiative and you draw, a Chrome Mox, then you've just time walked yourself. So, lowering the curve, making each card higher impact, was really the goal of this deck, and I think I've done a pretty good job. There are some cards that are much more powerful in certain situations. So Springheart Nantuko, if you can bestow that onto something and play a fetch land, you might be able to just win the game on the spot. Naya the Reliquary is really good with Nantuko. It also just naturally gets quite big, and it can go get Caracas and Arena of Glory, like Elvish Reclaimer, which is quite important when you do have some lands in your deck that are just more impactful than others. So overall, this is definitely not a traditional version of Zoo, and it's also not a traditional aggro deck in the current metagame. So a traditional Zoo deck would have far more 1-drops and go much lower to the ground and hope to end the game with, Ataka's command pumping all their creatures and doing a bunch of burn damage. And a more traditional aggro deck in the current metagame involves introducing the initiative, maintaining it, and winning the game over the course of a couple of turns, assuming that your high impact plays resolve. This deck is different to both of those. So if you want to try this, don't just swap in a bunch of cards that don't make sense. Like, really think about the deck philosophy as you're playing it, because the goal was definitely all of my cards matter, all of my cards do something in particular that progress the game state to where I want to be. I think this would be quite decent in any metagame that has a lot of mid-range. I also expect it to be decently good against other initiative decks, just because you're a bit lower to the ground, and when you play or introduce the initiative, you're usually playing an understated creature in order to do that. That's the payoff, where if you're not introducing the initiative, all of your creatures can be at or above rate, and that then gives you a slight edge. Most of the combo matchups will be like decently unfavorable. The sideboard is there to compensate for that. It's quite heavily stocked with, rule of law effects and whatnot, or effects that burn your opponent if they, try to keep playing non-creature spells to answer your threats. But otherwise, yeah, that's my take on Naya Zoo. Feel free to give it a shot if you've got the cards ready to go. And that's all for me. The deck list will be in the description below, and I'll catch you next time. This video was brought to you with the help and support of my lovely patrons. If you'd like to support me and my content and see your name up here on screen, click the link below. And if you like the content, hit subscribe for me. If you'd like, you can be notified of my upcoming videos. It's free, it doesn't cost you anything, but it will help me grow the channel, which I am trying to do this year. Otherwise, if you like the video, leave a like, and I'll catch you later.